Hi, my name is John Danaher. I'm going to teach elements of my leg lock system, which I taught to a group of talented students that I had in New York City, and which they used with spectacular success in international level grappling. I'm joined by a very good friend of mine, Bernardo Faria.
Hello, Israel. Thank you.
And my assistant, Carl Massaro. My intention in these videos is not simply to offer a collection of techniques. The world is full of instructional videos where a talented teacher or athlete shows a collection of moves. My intention rather is to show a holistic approach to leg locking that takes an athlete from the very beginning of an engagement, from the time of slapping hands with an opponent, all the way through hopefully to a successful submission hold. You're going to learn that there's a sequence of steps which encapsulate both techniques and tactics, which go in predictable fashion, leading from a neutral start to a decisive conclusion. Much of what I teach is going to be put in the backdrop of four mechanical elements, which form the basis of my entire teaching methodology. The first of these is well known to many people, the idea of lever and fulcrum, but I want to go further into the notion of lever and fulcrum and get more precise about exactly what we mean when we use these terms in the context of jiu-jitsu. Let's start off with a way of thinking about lever and fulcrum. Most people are aware that in the use of lever and fulcrum, I want to manipulate the end of the lever. Okay? I want to maximize my leverage by positioning or applying my forces at the end of a lever. Much less is talked about with regards to the fulcrum. A fulcrum, its value, can be judged according to three distinct elements. First, the height of the fulcrum, the hardness of the fulcrum. These are critical concepts. Let's have a look in the case of Judigatami, and then we'll bring it back to leg locks later on. The armbar, Judigatami, is well known to even beginning students of jiu-jitsu. It involves obviously a lever. Okay. When I go to work, I always want to work at the end of the lever. Okay. So often I see people working down here at the short end of the lever, when in fact they should be working up high at the end of the lever. The fulcrum. Most people use the middle of their thighs as the breaking fulcrum. Okay. So they'll take the hand back in a direction where the lever arm is taken through the middle of the thighs, and they're taught to pinch their knees as a means of creating a fulcrum over which to break the arm. Okay? There's some problems associated with this. You can see at the start. No matter how strongly I flex my legs, the muscles are not particularly hard. There's a problem with the hardness of the fulcrum. Okay? Picture a situation where I'm trying to break a pencil. If I put a pencil over a very hard fulcrum, it's extremely easy to break it. But if I put that same pencil over a very soft fulcrum, now it's difficult. Okay? So I want to maximize the hardness of the fulcrum. A simple way for me to do this is, instead of using my inner thigh muscles, I will use the hard bones of the hip. So when I go to take someone's arm, I want to make sure I take his right arm over my right hip, so that I use the hard bones of the hip as a breaking fulcrum rather than the soft inner thigh muscles. Okay? So this is the practical sense in which we use the hardness principle of fulcrums. We always want to maximize the hardness of the fulcrum. We'll soon see that the same things can be done in the case of leg locking. The other element is the height of the fulcrum. The lower the fulcrum, the harder it is for me to break a pencil over it, for example. Okay? So I want to do everything I can to raise the height of a given fulcrum. In the case of Judigatami, this is done by ensuring that my feet come back towards my opponent in a back heel fashion. I can also take one leg and raise the knee so that my hip is raised relative to the floor. And as a result, we get very, very strong breaking effects. I can also do it by changing the very nature of the Judigatami. I can, for example, put a foot underneath my opponent's head, and this will artificially raise the height of the fulcrum on the right-hand side. And as a result, we get much stronger breaking effects in a shorter distance. Why? Because I've raised the height of the fulcrum. Okay? I'm maximizing the hardness of the fulcrum by taking it over the hip bone rather than the soft adductor muscles, and I'm raising the height. As a result, I get better breaking leverage. Okay? Keep going. Considerations like these are extremely important when it comes time to apply the principles of lever and fulcrum in any jiu-jitsu context. So that's our first major theme that we're going to be pushing as we go through this entire DVD series, the idea of lever and fulcrum, paying particular attention to the idea of maximizing the use of the fulcrum through height and hardness. The other element, of course, in fulcrums is placement. If I place the fulcrum in an inefficient spot, it's hard. I have to do more mechanical, apply greater forces to get the break. So we're going to be paying a lot of attention to the placement of the fulcrum, the hardness of the fulcrum, and the height of the fulcrum. These will be critical concepts as we work our way through the DVD. A second key element in terms of this pure mechanics, which will play a very, very important role throughout this DVD, is the idea of directionality of force. So often I see talented students doubling or tripling the amount of work they have to do to get a task done by applying forces in the wrong directions or in less than optimal directions. Let's look at a common sense example that you're all familiar with, a basic butterfly sweep. From any basic sweeping situation, I want to apply forces in a given direction. Some of those directions will be more efficient than others. If I try to sweep Kawasaki directly to the side, I'm sweeping into one of his bases of support, especially when he starts to extend the leg out. And as a result, I'm having to do tremendous work because I'm pushing into my opponent's base of support. Okay? But just a simple change in direction to a forward angle means that I get much better results. It's not that I got magically stronger, it's just that I employed the same amount of force in a more efficient direction. Maximizing our use of force through applying forces in the appropriate direction is going to be an extremely important theme throughout this entire DVD series. A third critical theme is the idea of kazushi, or off-balancing. In theoretical terms, kazushi is really just an extension of lever and fulcrum, but it's such an important subset of that study in bottom position that I separate it as a distinct entity. It's something to be studied in and of itself. So, for example, I had someone standing over me in butterfly guard. As long as he's in good stance, working against me, it's difficult for me to do anything effective on someone who's in good stance and in good balance. But the moment I start to offset my opponent's balance, I get the two things that I need in order to play a strong submissions game. These are the idea of extension and movement. If you give me an opponent who's moving and extended, I can submit him. But if my opponent's contracted, it's hard for me to go into my submissions game. But the moment I start getting people out of balance and disturbing their base of support by taking their center of gravity outside of their base of support, getting hands to the floor, etc., and suddenly where I get extension, now I can go into submissions. I've broken the stance, I've distracted my opponent, and now the submissions game starts to become easy. From here, it won't be a difficult thing for me to fly my legs up into winning positions. Okay? So this will form another key element, a key theme that will run throughout this DVD, the idea of kazushi. Whenever we're in bottom position, regardless of bottom position, we're in any time we find ourselves underneath our opponent, we're always looking to get their center of gravity over their base of support, disturb their balance, and create extension and motion. If I have those two things, I can enter into my opponent's legs repeatedly and get to a win. Now, a fourth key theme that we work with, and one which I don't think has really been emphasized at all in jiu-jitsu instruction, but which I believe is absolutely one of the most important mechanical features of jiu-jitsu, is the use of wedges. Wedges are really just a species of inclined plane in physics. They can be used for many different tasks, but in the context of jiu-jitsu, the number one task they're employed for is to immobilize people. Often, when we think in jiu-jitsu, we talk about immobilization in terms of body weight. Okay? When in fact, wedges are by far and away the most important form of immobilization. If I can immobilize an opponent, then I can work my own body around them and ultimately control them and submit them. If I can't immobilize someone, if I can't direct and control their movement, I'm not going to submit anybody. The use of wedges is easily demonstrated by a simple experiment. Bernardo, you're going to lie down, side control body. Let's do an experiment here. Bernardo Faria is on top of his opponent. Bernardo is going to take his hands and put them behind his back.
Both hands?
Your hands behind your own back.
Yeah.
Now you're going to take your knees off the floor. Good. Right now, Bernardo Faria has a significant amount of his body weight directly on the chest of Carl Massaro. There's a sense in which this is a good pin. He's chest to chest, and a large percentage of his body weight is directly working down upon his opponent. And yet, if he maintained his hands behind his back, and I asked Carl Massaro to slide out and put him in guard, let's go, Carl. It was the easiest thing in the world. Why? Because Bernardo had no wedges around his opponent. Now let's contrast that. This time, I'm just going to put a wedge underneath one side of my opponent's body and a wedge with my knee on the other side. You can clearly see, because my hand is on the floor, I have no body weight on top of Carl Massaro. There is no body weight there. But when Carl goes to put me back in guard, he physically can't do it. It wasn't the body weight that held him down, it was the use of wedges. In fact, this time he applies a conventional pin. Now, Bernardo has wedges on his opponent. When he applies his body weight now, when Carl goes to escape and put him back in guard, it's significantly more difficult for him. Okay? Why? What changed? Well, earlier he had no wedges around Carl Massaro's body. Now he does. And in addition, he's reinforced them with body weight. The use of wedges to immobilize an opponent is probably the single most important theme that we're going to be pushing in this DVD series. Now, how we use wedges is extremely important. Ashigurami, the basis of this entire leg lock DVD, is essentially a system of wedges around your opponent's legs and hips. But unlike a conventional pin, it's not reinforced by body weight. When I go into an Ashigurami position, I have no body weight on top of my opponent. The only thing holding him in is the wedges, given a certain kind of Ashigurami. I have one form of Ashigurami. The wedges that are formed around my opponent, they are not reinforced by body weight. Okay? The only way I can reinforce them is mechanically by locking legs in various positions, etc., etc. Okay? As much as we like wedges, we like even more the notion of reinforced wedges. The question is, how are you going to reinforce them? Conventionally, in a pin, it's done by body weight, as we saw with Bernardo Faria earlier. In the case of Ashigurami, that's not the case. Since both of us have our buttocks on the floor, neither one of us has weight on the other. So the system of reinforcement has to be very different. Typically, it's done by blocking legs in either triangles or sankakus, or just simply crossing our feet. This idea of reinforced wedges and using wedges to immobilize opponents so that we can control them prior to submitting them is going to be one of the absolute most important themes that runs throughout this DVD series. So right from the back, we're going to see that there are 4 keynote themes that run throughout this entire DVD series, which we will come back to time and again. These are the idea of kazushi, or off-balancing. This is extremely important anytime we're in the bottom position. Kazushi, or off-balancing, will create movement and extension and weaken my opponent's stance. It will create the opportunities to go into locks on strong defensive opponents, opening up opportunities to go in and get to a leg lock finish. We've seen the idea of lever and fulcrum. We've seen that we're going to insist on the idea of maximizing the use of the lever by consistently hunting for the end of the lever and the manipulation of the end of the lever. At the same time, we're going to maximize our use of the fulcrum by insisting upon the height, the hardness, and the position of the fulcrum to make sure we get the greatest amount of mechanical work done with the least amount of effort. We've looked at the idea of directionality of force. Every time we go to apply force in a leg lock situation, we're going to have to insist on the idea of the correct directions of force. Without that, we're always going to have substandard results with our leg locking again. And then arguably the most important of the four, the idea of wedging. We're going to look at the idea of wedges as a means of immobilizing an opponent, gaining control over their movement so that we can hold them long enough to go into a leg lock win. We've seen the idea of reinforcing wedges as extremely important. The best forms of wedge always involve wedges on both sides of the human body. If I'm holding Kawasawa down in a side pin, and I have wedges on one side of his body, that will prove inadequate when he simply slides away from me and is gone. I had wedges, but I only had them on one side of his body. When I apply a wedge on both sides of the body, now when he goes to move, I can easily immobilize him. Okay, so we need wedges on both sides of the body. At the same time, we want to reinforce those wedges to the greatest degree possible. In the case of conventional pins, they're usually reinforced by body weight. But we can't do that in Ashigurami since we're both sitting in front of each other. The wedges have to be reinforced by biomechanical means, usually cross feet or triangle legs. These four themes run throughout our DVD series. Our intention is to show the leg lock system in its entirety. The only way we can start that project is by giving a brief overview of what the leg lock system is. Okay? When most people teach a leg lock, they teach it as a simple move, a heel hook, a figure four toe hold, or what have you. What I want to do is to teach you an entire set of skills, what I call the 6 essential skills of heel hooking from start to finish. It's important we have a general sense of what we're trying to accomplish here. Let's make some simple distinctions right from the start. The leg lock system has a definite structure. There's the general system, the system overall, which is part of the jiu-jitsu system overall. Okay, there's Brazilian jiu-jitsu on the one hand, there's a leg lock system within that, and within the general leg lock system, there are 3 subsystems. Probably the single best way that we can start the ball rolling is to talk about what is the general leg lock system and what are the 6 essential skills of heel hooking. Let's understand first, or let's bring in some kind of precision when we talk about the leg lock system. Okay, leg locking is just a generic term. This means any form of lock that is applied to my opponent's legs. To be honest with you, what I teach is not a leg locking system per se. It's an Ashigurami system. Remember, there are many forms of leg lock that don't involve Ashigurami at all. In fact, my friend Bernardo Faria is famous for applying a certain kind of leg lock which doesn't involve Ashigurami at all. Okay? Really what I teach is an Ashigurami system. Remember, there are many forms of leg lock that don't involve Ashigurami at all. What I did is I focused upon what I believe are the most high percentage forms of leg locking when they're allowed, at least in competition, which is heel hooking. For mechanical reasons, which I'll outline later, I believe that heel hooking is probably the mechanically most efficient way of attacking an experienced opponent's legs, the one with the highest percentage chance of success. And I believe the statistics back me up on this. If you look at international competition where heel hooks are permitted, you will see that for every time people tap to other forms of leg lock, they'll tap 100 times the heel hooks. So we've got, on the one hand, the general leg lock system, which encapsulates 6 distinct skills which you will have to master and which I will teach in the course of this DVD. Within that general system, there are 3 distinct subsystems. Okay? These are, I'll demonstrate with Kawasawa, 3 families of Ashigurami. The way of breaking Ashigurami down, which I'm going to show you, is the one which I taught to all of my students. There are different ways I could teach an Ashigurami system, but it's my belief that the 3 subsystem method, which I use with my students and which I'm going to use with you now, is probably the clearest and easiest way to understand what would otherwise be a very large amount of information. The first family, the first subsystem, are so-called straight Ashiguramis. Okay? A straight Ashigurami is any situation where two of my legs, you should know by the way, Ashigurami is a generic term, it just means entangled legs, okay? Typically it refers to a situation where two of my legs control one of my opponent's legs. So there's a sense of mechanical advantage that I should always have some kind of control advantage over my opponent because two of my legs are controlling one of his. So even if he were considerably larger and stronger than me, in theory at least two of my legs should be stronger than one of my opponent's legs, okay? There are three main forms of Ashigurami. The first are the so-called straight Ashigurami attacks, where Kawasaro's left leg goes over my right hip, so that his leg stays on one side of my center line. Okay? So within this family, there are many variations. So for example, I might have what many people refer to as a standard Ashigurami, or a Rimi Ashigurami as I call it. Okay? From here, I could bring my feet to the inside, like so. This would be still, the leg is going across my right hip, so we're still within the framework of a straight Ashigurami system, but I've changed my Ashigurami now to a Senkaku with my feet locked inside. Okay? I could have my feet locked on the outside. Still, we're in a straight Ashigurami situation, but the nature of my Ashigurami has changed. So we saw three different three variations of a straight Ashigurami. Okay? This stands in contrast to a cross Ashigurami. And a cross Ashigurami, my opponent's leg goes across my center line. His right leg goes across my right hip. Okay? And within this context, there are many different variations. Okay? I can have my feet close together like so, inside my opponent's legs. I can have my feet over my opponent's legs, over the far hip. I can have my feet locked in a triangle with my feet to the inside. I can have my feet locked in a triangle with a foot to the outside. These are all cross Ashigurami, but different variations within that family. Okay? A third form of Ashigurami is the so-called reverse Ashigurami. This is the only form of Ashigurami where I face the same direction as my opponent. Okay? Every other Ashigurami I face towards my opponent, and this one I face away from my opponent. From here, I have one leg caught between mine, and in this framework there are many variations, but they're all held together by a common thread, the idea that we both face the same direction. I face away from my opponent in the same direction he's facing. Okay? This stands in contrast to all the other forms of Ashigurami, where I always face my opponent, like so. Okay? So, we have then a general system of leg locking, which encapsulates 6 distinct skills that are put into a sequence, a slightly flexible sequence, but overall a fairly critical sequence. And within that general framework, there are 3 distinct subsystems: straight Ashigurami family, cross Ashigurami family, and reverse Ashigurami family. You will be expected to learn and master all 3 of these subsystems in the context of a general system if you're going to call yourself competent and leg locking. We looked at the idea of a general theory of leg locking. We saw that it encapsulates 6 distinct skills, 6 essential skills, without which you can't really call yourself a competent leg locker, at least with heel hooks. The first of these, and the element which starts off or gets the ball rolling with leg locking, is always step number 1, attaining a grip and inside position. Everything in the sport of Jiu-Jitsu begins with grip. In the case of Ashigurami-based leg locks, the other element is inside positioning of my feet or my knees. Let's have a look at the idea of grip and inside position as the first essential skill in our general leg lock system. We need to be highly competent in the use of Ashigurami in both top and bottom position. We're going to start in bottom position. That's where the practical study of Ashigurami and heel hooking is going to begin. Before we can begin that, we need to study the idea of getting some form of working grip upon my opponent. Okay? Until I grip my opponent and come to grips with him, I can't control him. Okay? One of the big themes of our DVD is the idea of gaining control over opponent's movement, and then from there working our way into submission holds. But everything begins with control. The only way one human being can control another is through some kind of physical contact. And in the case of jiu-jitsu, that means through grip. Okay? Gripping is the first skill that you will get to utilize in any competition or sparring scenario. Until you get to grips with your opponent, nothing is going to happen. The question is, how are we going to use grip in the most effective fashion? Okay? A large part of that will depend upon how my opponent is positioned as he goes to make contact with me. We're going to start in a situation where my opponent is on two knees in front of me, and I'm working from underneath from a seated butterfly guard situation. One of the most important forms of gripping for advantage that we can work with is the idea of a 2-on-1 grip. Okay? If I simply grip my opponent in a generic fashion like so, I haven't really exercised any kind of advantage. There's nothing intrinsically advantageous about my grip. One of my hands is gripping one of my opponent's hands. If he proves to be stronger than me, he can easily pull away and move on. Okay? Moreover, the very nature of gripping has to be understood here. The human hand is set up in such a way that it has strong zones and weak zones. The weakness of any grip when I go to grab my opponent's hands and wrists is through the area between my thumb and my fingers. That represents the weak zone of my grip. If I hold my hand like so, you can see a space between my thumb and my fingers. That's the space of escape for my opponent. If he pulls his wrist in the direction my thumb is pointing, he will easily escape from my grip. If he went the opposite way, he would never escape because he's going into my hand. If he goes vertically upwards, he's going into my thumb. If he goes vertically downwards, he's going into the strength of my fingers. If he goes out in the direction my thumb points, he escapes easily. Okay? He's exploiting the very nature of the human hand and its weaknesses. Whenever I go to employ a 2-on-1 grip upon my opponent, I have to cover the weak zone of my hands. The only way I can do this is through the use of 2-on-1 gripping. So, when someone comes in and goes to escape from a given grip, I know ahead of time that's the zone of weakness. It's revealed by the direction of my thumb. My thumb points towards the weak zone of the grip. What I need to do is cover that zone of weakness with the other hand. Okay? The easiest way for you to understand this is I always want my thumbs pointing in opposite directions. So when Kyle Massaro goes to pull away from me and I put a second hand on here, that's the weak zone shown by my left thumb pointing out here. I cover it with the right hand. Now when Kyle goes to pull away from me, it's shockingly difficult. Okay? For the first time, I'm using one hand to get an initial grip, and I'm covering the weaknesses of that hand with my other. So I have two hands on one in a way where it's quite difficult for my opponent to pull away from me. When Kyle Massaro goes to pull away, I don't want to sit still and resist his pull. Kyle, just explosively pull your elbow back to your own body. Okay? He can eventually pull out. Okay? I never want to stay still against my opponent's pull. Let's look at the result. Eventually he'll pull, no matter how tightly I hold on. Whenever someone goes to pull, I want to move with their pull. So as he goes to pull, I want to pull my body in. So I shorten the distance between us. Okay? Remember, if I'm pulling back and he pulls, then that's the inevitable result. Okay? Once I get my grip, I must be sensitive to the direction of his resistance. Okay? So I catch a grip, I see him go to pull away, and I move with the pull. As a result, my grip is retained. And from here, I can start to play my attacking game. Okay? Another example of this would be when Kyle Massaro was standing. This time, I use a different form of 2-on-1 gripping. I start with a down grip. Okay, my thumb points downwards. Now, you should know by now, where is the zone of weakness? It's always revealed by the direction of my thumb. If Kyle Massaro pulls his hand in that direction, he easily escapes. If he tries to push towards me, my hand easily holds him. If he tries to go vertically up, I easily hold him. If he goes vertically down, again I can hold him. But when he goes in the direction my thumb is pointing, he easily escapes. So, 2-on-1 gripping, one thumb pointing against the other. He goes to pull away now, and it's exceptionally difficult. One of my hands is asserting a grip, and the second hand is covering the weakness of the first hand. When I use my hands in this 2-on-1 fashion, you can create extraordinary gripping pressure. Often, when students visit the gym or we're in competition and opponents come up to talk to us afterwards, a common theme that they all express is that my students have extraordinary grip strength. It's not that they have extraordinary grip strength, it's that they know what they're doing when they grip. Every time they go to make a grip, the first thing they do is they cover the weakness of the initial grip with the second hand. This is a crucial theme in gripping, and it's best done through the use of 2-on-1 grips. We'll be spending quite a bit of time on the idea of 2-on-1 grips. We're starting with what we call 2-on-1 wrist grips. Here, I have a 2-on-1 down grip, where my hand goes down towards the floor. I reinforce it with the second hand, making sure my thumbs point in opposite directions so that the weakness of one hand is covered by the other. When Kawamasara goes to pull away, it's shockingly difficult. Now we're going to add a second crucial concept to the idea of gripping, the concept of the immovable elbow. What is the immovable elbow? One of the strongest structures of the human body is when I bring my own elbow to my hips. Let's do an experiment. Calm, stand square. We're going to link hands, like so, okay? I'm going to bring my elbow to my hip, just like so. When Kawamasara walks backwards and lifts, my whole body will come off the floor before my elbow leaves my hip. If you want to feel strong to another human being through grip, bring your elbow close to your own hip. Okay, this utilizes all of the powerful lat muscles in the back, some of the strongest muscles in the human body. When Kawamasara pulls me, I will lose my balance before my elbow comes off my hip. So if I want to create a strong gripping structure, one of the best things I can do is once I assert grips, is to bring my elbows to my own hips. So when I work from a down position and I catch my opponent's hand, I not only reinforce one hand with the other, I close my elbows to my hips. When Kawamasara goes to pull away from me, my whole body will move before the grip breaks. I can create the illusion of immense gripping strength, not because I'm strong, but because I'm gripping properly. I'm taking advantage of these subtle elements of gripping that prove to be so important when we enter into the leg lock game. We saw earlier that whenever someone goes to pull away from me, I never stay still and pull against them. Okay? If I stay still and he yanks, eventually he's going to break out. Okay? Instead, standing square, when my opponent goes to pull away from me, walking, I walk with them. I never resist a pull by pulling back and remaining stationary. I move in the same direction as my opponent's pull. He's down on two knees. We saw from a 2-on-1 up grip, my opponent goes to yank away. I move in with the pull. He goes to stand up, walks away. I move with the pull, walking. And eventually, we're going to get opportunities to disrupt his balance, etc., etc. Okay? So some keynote themes. Whenever I go to grip, whatever grip I employ, whatever initial grip I employ, will always have a weak zone that my opponent can exploit. My job is to cover that weak zone with my second hand. Then, when my opponent goes to apply ever-increasing amounts of force to break the grips, my job is to go into strong structures, usually involving elbows to my own hips. And then the third element is the idea of moving with my opponent's resistance. I don't remain stationary and turn it into a pulling match of my strength against his. Rather, I simply move with my opponent's pull, and I can dissipate the force of my opponent's rearward pull to retain attachment to my opponent. So we've seen this critical idea of 2-on-1 gripping. So far, we've only been working with 2-on-1 wrist grips. We've identified two main forms of gripping. When I go to grip the wrist, my two main options are 2-on-1 up grips, where my thumbs point upwards towards the ceiling, like so. These are especially useful for drawing my opponent out of balance and getting hands over my shoulders. When they're used in conjunction with my butterfly hooks, Kawamasara goes to pull away, I can get people up and out of balance and get hands on the floor from where we can start to go on the attack. When my opponent is standing, typically, now we'll use 2-on-1 down grips, where my thumbs and the palms of my hand point downwards to the floor. When my opponent goes to pull away, I connect everything to my hips as he goes to walk, walk, walk. We go with our opponent's walk until we can start disrupting their balance, etc., etc. Okay? So the first family of grips that we employ is upon our opponent's wrists, specifically 2-on-1 up grips and 2-on-1 down grips. Now, one of the most important forms of 2-on-1 gripping works with exactly the same principle. This is the 2-on-1 elbow grip. We'll look at it first in the case of a kneeling opponent. If I grip my opponent like so, we've already seen the idea of a zone of weakness. It's easily identified in the human grip by the direction that my thumb points. If my opponent pulls his hand in that direction, he easily escapes. Okay? We saw we could cover that by using 2-on-1 wrist grips. Another excellent option is the 2-on-1 elbow grip. Here, I put my hand like so and slide it down my opponent's arm and hold at the bony growth that occurs at the end of the upper arm where it meets the forearm. If I just hold with one hand, Kawasaki can easily identify the zone of weakness. It's shown by the direction of my thumb, and he pulls his arm in that direction, he easily escapes. Okay? If I just hold here, he identifies the zone of weakness and pulls his hand and easily escapes. But if I hold both together, the weakness of one is covered by the strength of the other. As Kawasaki goes to pull away from me, it's shockingly difficult. In addition, it's very easy for me to use the principle of the elbows close to my hip. In this position, my elbows are almost immovable. In addition, I can bring in another concept, the concept of the center line. If I can take my opponent's arm across my center line so that his right hand connects to my right hip, this greatly weakens my opponent's ability to pull away from me. When he goes to yank away, it's shockingly difficult, and you feel like you have much greater strength than perhaps you really do. When my opponent goes to yank away, I have 2 free feet, which I can use in any number of ways to go into various forms of attack. Okay? So even though my hands are occupied, my feet are free. This represents a huge advantage in any grip into attack situation. If my opponent is standing, exactly the same things are true. I grip again. When Kawasaki goes to pull away, I connect everything close to the chest. He goes walking, walking, walking. And we've seen we dissipate, walking, walking. We dissipate the force by moving with him. If I stay still and push off the floor and he pulls, eventually he'll break away. But when I see him walking and pulling and I move with him, I can easily hold on to the opponent until I trip him down to the mat. Okay? We've been looking at this idea of gripping for effect. So far, we've focused only upon the mechanics of gripping. We've seen one of the most important families of gripping is the idea of 2-on-1 gripping. The notion we're working with is that any given initial grip has a weakness inherent in the very nature of the human body, and our job is to cover those initial weaknesses with the second hand or the second arm. In this way, we can make it extraordinarily difficult for our opponent to do well in any grip fight situation. We've also seen a key mechanical concept, the idea of the immovable elbow. Whenever my elbow is close to my hips, it's extraordinarily difficult for my opponent to break that structure and start to extend me. My whole body will be dragged off the ground before my elbows leave my hips. We've also seen a third key element, the idea of not resisting a pull or a push, but rather going with it to dissipate the force that our opponent is trying to apply on us. Now, getting away from mechanics, we're going to start looking at some conceptual elements. It is absolutely crucial whenever we study the grip game that we have a clear notion of gripping for a purpose. So often I see athletes gripping just for the sake of gripping. They get grips without any clear sense of what exactly they're trying to do. Okay? It is absolutely crucial that when I get a grip upon an opponent, I have a clear sense of what am I trying to accomplish. Okay? In my case, the number one goal I have in any grip fighting situation is to first establish a working contact upon my opponent that shuts down their ability to be dangerous to me. When I work against someone in a situation like this, I know what his intention is. His intention is to get past my legs into my upper body. So for example, if Kalmasara posts a hand on my shoulder and pushes and throws my legs to the side, this would be a good example of him clearing my legs out to the side and getting into a dominant upper body position. I know what he wants. Okay? A big part of what I'm trying to do is to shut down his game and then assert my own game. When I go to grip someone, my number one priority is number one, shut down his game. Number two, assert my own. So when I get a 2-on-1 grip on my opponent and lock in like so, when he goes into any kind of guard passing scenario here, he can't even begin until he clears this grip. Okay? Until he clears this grip, he's not passing my guard. I don't care what he does. Okay? So there's a sense in which by establishing a grip upon him and taking away one of his two arms, he has to address that problem first before he can even begin to do what he wanted to do, which was to get past my legs. So in that sense, I've taken the initiative upon my opponent. Almost every guard pass in the sport of jiu-jitsu involves the use of two arms. There are very, very few high percentage one-handed guard passes. Okay? I know that. And so if I tie up one of my opponent's arms, I know he's not passing my guard until he's addressed this problem successfully. Okay? Now he's reacting to my grip. And off that reaction, there's so many things I can go into work with. Okay? By taking a decisive, intimidating grip at the outset of the action, I've immediately stopped his game plan in its tracks. He can't begin passing my guard until he frees my grip. That means immediately he's a step behind me. From there, we can start to assert our own game. And that game is one based around the notion of kazushi, or breaking my opponent's balance. My goal, whenever I get grips on people, is first, shut down their game, and second, assert my own. The number one way in which I do this is to get my opponent's hands to the floor. If my opponent's hands are on the floor, that means they're not passing my legs, they're not going after any kind of submission hold on me, etc., etc. Okay? So my whole thing, once I get a grip, whether it be 2-on-1 elbow, whether it be 2-on-1 wrist, with variations like so, is always to get his hands on the mat. And that means I have to start using my feet. Okay? So, for example, my opponent goes in a kind of a generic start situation, working like so. I'll go in, I'll get that 2-on-1 grip. Kalmasara goes to yank away from me, and from here I bring my body in, the legs start lifting, and what have we got? Two hands on the floor. Okay? Kalmasara is standing over me. From here, he goes to break grips. From here, it's an easy thing to put hand and hips on the floor. Okay? However we go, that's always the simple sequence that starts and finishes the grip fighting game. 1, get some form of efficient grip. And we're defining efficiency in terms of using two hands where one hand covers the weakness of the other. Use that grip first to shut down your opponent's offense. You know what he wants. He wants to get past your legs. And then third, use it in an effective, proactive fashion to get your opponent's hands or hips down to the mat. If you can keep that sense of purpose in mind when you're going to be in any grip fight encounter, you will be an effective gripper. You will be a gripper who works with a sense of purpose and a sense of direction, which is so important in starting the leg lock game. We're looking at the 6 essential skills of leg locking out of Ashitarami. We've seen that the first step, the first of these 6 essential skills, is the idea of grip and inside position. We're looking at a general theory of gripping for effect. So far, we're looking at the bottom position. We've seen that when we have an opponent, whether he be on feet or down on 2 knees, one of our favorite ways to grip is through the use of the so-called 2-on-1s. These can occur usually first at the wrists. We've seen the idea that whenever I grip my opponent's wrist, there's a zone of weakness which is easily revealed by the direction of my thumb, and my opponent can easily exploit this. We always, when we go to take grips, want to cover that zone of weakness, whether it be with up grips, like so, my palms facing up, or whether it be with down grips. We've seen an elbow 2-on-1. When my opponent goes to yank away, it's shockingly difficult, and it leaves us with 2 free feet, which we can use to off-balance an opponent and start the action of getting my opponent's hands down to the mat. So we're covering several things at the same time. The idea of first, creating an intimidating grip that it's not easy for your opponent to break. Second, negating their attempts to get past your legs, which require the use of 2 hands, by immobilizing one of them. And then third, getting onto the attacking game so that we're not just gripping for the sake of gripping, but gripping for a purpose. And that purpose is to get my opponent's hands down on the mat and my opponent out of balance. Now, we've looked at one of the most important forms of initial contact, which is to seize my opponent by the wrists. That's natural because when someone comes to fight me, typically the wrists are the closest thing to me. Okay? But there's always going to be times your opponent gets his grips upon you first. The question is, what kinds of grips? The one we're going to look at now is upper body grips. If Bernardo Faria has grips on my collar or arms, like so, I want to make use of a very special grip, tricep gripping. Okay? Normally, most people go to grip at the elbows, like so. Okay? I generally favor a higher grip up here at the tricep, whether I be gripping my opponent's collar tie or his bicep tie, just like so. So rather than grip my opponent at the elbows, I like to come here underneath the triceps, just like so. What's so valuable about this grip is that it enables me to dominate the arm from underneath, so that when Bernardo tries to switch to a grip on my legs, he physically can't do it because I'm underneath my opponent's arms. I don't just want to lift up, I want to take Bernardo's hands past my shoulders. So I'm always looking in these situations to draw the 2 arms forward and get my head into good position. Again, I use the principle of the immovable elbow. The further my elbows from my hips, the weaker my body is. So I always want my elbows in close with good head position. When Bernardo tries to grab my legs, it's exceptionally difficult, okay, because I'm dominating the area underneath the arms. So whenever someone gets upper body grips on me, my thing is to go through, take the triceps, and draw him to me. And now, it's the easiest thing for me to get hands on the floor and go to work. Remember, whenever we go to grip, we have a negative function, which is to stop my opponent doing what he wants to do, and a positive function, which is to initiate my attacks by getting his hands to the mat. I know what he wants. He wants to pass my legs. So for example, we can take a collar tie and then start pushing on my legs and clearing my legs out to the side. The moment he goes into any kind of grip, I want to prevent him from getting to my legs. So I make sure I get underneath my training partner's triceps and I pull everything in. When he tries to access my legs, it's so difficult and relatively easy for me to get hands to the mat. Once Bernardo's hands go to the mat, there's no question of him trying to get a hold of my legs now. He can't take his hands on the mat, he'll lose his balance. But I, on the other hand, am extremely close now to the various forms of leg attack, which we'll be looking at later in the series. So this forms a second form of useful gripping sequence, which my students often make use of. We've looked at wrist grips, now we've looked at tricep grips. Once again, my opponent's hands are in front of me. This is the time to go in and secure wrists. Okay? If my opponent puts hands on my upper body, this is the time to go into tricep gripping. Okay? When he tries to access the legs now, it's difficult. It's relatively easy for us to get hands on the floor and go into the many forms of attack that will be easy to take advantage of once the hands touch the floor. Now, we've been looking at a theory of gripping. We've seen that we always want, as the key theme that we're pushing here in this DVD, is the idea of gripping for a purpose. So often I see talented athletes gripping, but without any real sense of what they're gripping for. They're just getting grips for the sake of getting grips. We always want a very clear sense of direction. Okay? First, there has to be, the first element is strength of connection. I can't have grips that my opponent can just easily break. okay, then I won't be effective at all. So we've seen simple mechanical methods of strengthening our grips. We've seen the idea of 2-on-1 coverage. We've seen the idea of, instead of gripping elbows, going higher to the triceps so that we can close elbows to hip and get truly strong, useful grips. Okay? We've seen the first element to any gripping exchange is negative, which is to shut down my opponent's ability to assert his game upon me. Okay? But then we can't just play a negative game of gripping. Jiu-jitsu is not about stopping other people from doing what they want to do. Ultimately, it's about asserting yourself in positive directions to get to a submission win. We've seen that the third element, after strength of grip, negation of my opponent's techniques and tactics, the third is to create openings for attack. And the number one method to get into my opponent's legs is to get hands on the floor. Get my opponent out of balance and get hands on the floor. Okay? We've seen situations where I worked at my opponent's wrists. We've seen situations where we worked at our training partner's triceps. Now let's go into the idea of underhooks. Underhooks play a particularly important role in the leg lock game because they offer the highest percentage chance of getting in underneath my opponent and accessing the legs. If I work with overhooks, I'm not disparaging overhooks, by the way. Overhooks are fantastic for upper body attacks. They're fantastic for sweeping, but they're difficult to get the leg game to work. If I have overhooks, even if I get my opponent's hands on the floor and elevate him, he's still underneath my arms. Let's have a look at what happens when we try to elevate someone up. Yeah, I got his hands on the floor, but when I try to go into any kind of a leg lock game, now I tend to get crunched and it's very, very difficult for me to go successfully into my legs, into my opponent's legs, because his right arm is an underhook, which prevents my head from going forward and getting underneath my opponent's hips. Okay? Later on today, we're going to show that my ability to get my head underneath my opponent's hips is absolutely critical to success for bottom leg locks. Now, the problem is Bernardo's underhook is preventing my head from going forward. The combination of his head position and the underhook gets me extended, and now a simple sprawl of his legs will take me right past any kind of ashigarami that I have and into a good position. Okay? So working into my opponent's legs is difficult with overhooks. I'm not going to say it's impossible, but it's not high percentage. Okay? That changes dramatically when I'm underneath my opponent's arms. Okay? Particularly in situations where I'm underneath both of them. Okay? Now when I start to elevate people from situations like this, it's very easy for me to get my opponent up into situations where his hips go directly over my head and he's completely out of balance. Okay? He has no ability to get underneath my arms now and save himself or stretch me out. Okay? So as a general rule, when we work with underhooks, we're going to have a much better chance of success to get into my opponent's legs than if I work with overhooks. Now, how we work with underhooks is very important. I have my own views on this. My opponents on two knees, when I work the underhook game, I try to avoid something which is very, very common I see many people using, which is body locks here. Okay? Now, body locks can be extremely useful for certain purposes, but there are some problems associated with their use in this position. Bernardo can easily take a forearm and put it across my neck. Just hold the forearm across the neck. So I'm in here, and now it's easy for him now to stretch out and break my grips. Okay? Why? Because when I lock my hands here, unless I lock right behind my opponent's neck, any lock below the scapula makes it easy for him to create a forearm in front, and from here cause real problems to break my grip. Now he can hold onto his own underhooks, good, and cause problems for me. Okay? So generally what I like to see people do is rather than lock their hands, I like to see them work with elbows pointed inwards and a hand behind the shoulder. When my hands go down the body, in the case of double underhooks, they tend to become less effective because my opponent's head can move backwards. And that's exactly when they can start putting frames in front of you. So I prefer to see people work like so, and the elbow dominates his elbow. When my elbow is closed, Bernardo can easily pommel the forearm in front and cause problems. So what I'm looking to do in the underhook situation is to form a false grip where my wrist is bent 90 degrees and my elbow dominates his elbow. And this is done on both sides. So when Bernardo goes to move away from me, it's shockingly difficult. And from here it's an easy thing to get him elevated and hands on the floor. Okay? The question is, how are we going to get to those underhook positions? It's not easy on a talented opponent. Okay? So, whenever someone's working in situations like this, we're going to start by placing a hand on our training partner's head and taking my second hand, pinky knuckle, up just like so. And I put my forearm over the top of my training partner's forearm. If I just try to push my hand through, Bernardo will always close his elbows and stop me from getting in. Okay? So what I want to do in these situations is to put my hand in and I pull on the head and I shoot the first hand through, just like so. When Bernardo goes to yank away from me, my elbow dominates his elbow. Then the second hand goes through on the other side. We get exactly the same grip, and I dominate the second elbow. When Bernardo goes to pull away from me, it's surprisingly difficult. Now, I bring the hips underneath, and we start elevating. Once the hands are on the floor, we know now from here, there's 1,000 different ways we can go into the legs and start the leg lock game. Okay? So that's my favorite way to use underhook gripping to go into my opponent's legs and get hands down to the floor.